we are going to be talking about under the hood today of what it means to be a remote worker and what the dynamics that you can expect in a fully distributed team. And we sincerely have the best of the best here for you to learn from. These brands are tried and true, and they are just the epitome of great virtual operations. So you are learning from the absolute experts. Just to help you get to know these companies a little bit better, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just introduce themselves, say their location, and describe their role in their company. So Kevan, do you want to kick us off?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks so much, Laurel. Great to be here with you all today. So my name is Kevan Lee. I'm the VP of Marketing at Buffer. And Buffer is a social media management software. And we have been remote mostly from the beginning, about 6 or 7 years now, and I've been at the company for 6 years. So remote work is one of the foundations of our business. We also really emphasize transparency, diversity, and inclusion. So we really do value these cultural things that have become a core part of our company, and remote work is right there at the top. It's one of the things that has been most important to us as we've grown the team, grown the company, and excited to share some of our learnings with y'all today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Zandy, why don't you go next?
Hi, I'm Zandy Ring. I'm the Director of Happiness Experience at Automattic. Automattic is a fully remote company, and we have been since day one. I have been with Automattic for 7.5 years. And exactly like Kevan said, we prize remote work and finding the best people anywhere they currently are. We don't feel like you have to live somewhere very specific in order to have an opportunity to have a high impact.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And last but not least, Darren.
Hey, Laurel, great to see you. And thanks all for tuning in today. I'm Darren. I'm the head of remote at GitLab. GitLab is a project collaboration and software development tool. And we are all remote, over 1,300 people in more than 67 countries. And very similar to the other panelists, documentation and culture is very core to who we are. Our values are our culture, and we make sure we write all of that down and iterate on that and find new ways to exemplify those values. And so I'm excited to dig in and share a bit about what we've learned as an all-remote team, and hopefully it'll be applicable to those tuning in.
Fantastic. Thank you. And my name is Laurel Farr. I am the CEO and founder of Distribute Consulting, as well as the founder of the Remote Work Association. Distribute Consulting is the world's only consulting firm that specializes exclusively in remote work. And so we are honored to be here with these great experts, and really excited to open the windows of remote work and virtual operations and help you understand what this looks like on a day-to-day basis. And for those of you that are remote already and have remote experience, you've definitely heard of these companies before and probably have the hopes and dreams of working with them someday. So this will also give you the opportunity to kind of peek in the windows of their culture and their operations to see if it's a good match for you as a future goal. So let's start actually there with that question for all of you. What attracted you to each of your respective companies in the first place? Was it just the brand that you had heard of, or was there something special that piqued your interest? Anybody want to raise their hand and go first?
Yeah, I can take this one. It's wild. When I actually heard from GitLab for the first time, I'd never heard of GitLab. And I've kind of engineered remote roles for my entire career. So I've been remote across the spectrum of co-located and hybrid for my entire career. And I actually had to sit down. I was like, wait a minute, you're all remote by choice. This is intentional. You don't have to lobby for it or kind of prove your worth and prove that you should be remote. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. And I thought finally a group of people that gets it. And what's wild is that just a year or two ago, that was still kind of the niche. And now millions and millions and millions of people have a peek into what remote can be like. But what I loved about GitLab was that everything was written down. Transparency was obvious. Their entire handbook is public. Before you even start working here, you can see what the benefits are. There's a jobs FAQ, and there's a section that says, what's it like to work at GitLab? So you can find that out. I just thought that was so refreshing, and the accountability and the discipline that was obvious before I even came to GitLab was incredible.
Love it.
Yeah, I think
Kevin and Zandy?
some of what Darren said resonates a lot with my experience too. So I came into marketing through writing, and excuse me, when I was looking for work, just the fact that I could write all day from the comfort of my home was mind blowing to me 6 or 7 years ago. I was like, this is the dream. So I kind of worked toward that dream in a lot of ways, and very lucky that Buffer took the chance on me. Some of the things that appealed to me specifically was this feeling of trust and respect that came with remote work, where I feel like I hold myself to a very high standard, and so I'm going to get the work done no matter where I am, and to work at a place that recognizes that and appreciates that and optimizes for that, I think was kind of life-changing for me in a lot of ways. So I feel very lucky that I found Buffer when I did.
Mm.
Yeah, I could echo both these gentlemen almost exactly. I had been working in a co-located space before I joined Automattic. But when I found out about Automattic and found out about the values that Automattic has and the creed and the mission to democratize publishing, as a blogger, that really spoke to me, even though it's a blog that I think my dad is the only one who reads, but that matters. It counts.
Dad's important.
But when I investigated more into the things that Automattic does and the standards that they have, it mattered. And then, like Kevin said, coming on board, the amount of trust that's placed in every automatician is just staggering, especially when you come from a corporate role in a co-located space. It can just be it's night and day. And I can absolutely say it's changed the entire course of my life.
Absolutely. Let's zoom into that a little bit. You said what Automattic does, and so let's zoom into the daily processes and operations of these companies, because that's exactly how I got started as a consultant in the first place. Is that I was the COO of a fully distributed company of about 500, and I was hungry to know what other companies were doing, right? Like, what are you doing, and what are you doing? And there's just pretty limited resources and organizational development of virtual organizations, and so it's just asking questions and finding where we were the same, and also finding how we were different and what makes us unique. So Zandy, I'll bounce that question back to you. What do you think Automattic does differently in their operations and employee experience that maybe the other companies don't do?
Sure. One of the big ones that we do, this is a little bit of a cheat because I think there are actually several companies that do this one as well, but it's unusual for traditional companies to the extreme. We don't use email at all, and I know that Basecamp also doesn't use email at all, and there's many others as well, but we don't use it at all. And in fact, we rely on text communication. I won't say exclusively because we use Zoom for one-on-ones and town halls and things of that nature. But for our day-to-day work, we use synchronous conversation in Slack. And we also have a motto, which is P2 or it didn't happen. And P2 is a product that we've developed for, it's blogging, it runs on WordPress, and it's a product that we use to archive everything so that everything is written down, everything can be found again. And if it's important, it has to go on P2. And you can see every P2 in the company. So if you want to dig into the financials, you go over to up and to the right or the money P2, and you can dig in and you can look at anything in the company. And I think that's another place where Automattic is unique, where it's fully open. We want everybody to be able to see everything because of that trust, again, that we give every automatician.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those handbooks I mean, I often describe them that handbooks, they were nice in the 90s and 2000s, but they are the lifeblood of distributed companies. Darren, I know that GitLab's handbook is transparent and iconic. I mean, as an operations manager, it's a thing of beauty, let's be honest. So yeah, I think that because that's how we help our teams. That's how we support them asynchronously, right? You can find answers, you can troubleshoot problems, no matter where you are, no matter who you can access. It really becomes this organic, living lifeblood of information management. So I love that.
Exactly.
Speaking of GitLab's handbook, Darren, what do you think that you do at GitLab that's different than other distributed companies?
Yeah, we have a few forcing functions. We call them forcing functions that remind us to always work remote first. We expire our Slack messages after 90 days. So we have Slack, but we pretty much use it only for informal communications. We have topical channels like hiking and parenting. We have location channels like location Raleigh or Tampa or Southern California. So people that happen to live near one another can manage groups and get together and go to co-working spaces or what have you. But we expire those messages so that we force work to begin and end in GitLab, within a GitLab issue, within a GitLab merge request. And if you start something in Slack, it won't take long before someone will say, hey, probably not a great idea to start work here. It's going to be gone in 90 days. And it only takes one or two of those reminders before new hires, oh, I get it. All right, we're using Slack for something different than basically any other company in the world. So that's a big one. And we also have a really high burden on meetings. We one of our sub values is bias for asynchronous, and we fundamentally think that's a more inclusive way to communicate. It takes a broader array of time zones into account. And sometimes in meetings, if you're not very extroverted, it's easy to kind of just shy away and not have your voice heard. But when everyone's in a shared Google Doc, everyone is on an equal playing field, and you can contribute in that way. So for every meeting at GitLab, you have to have a Google Doc agenda attached to it. If there's no agenda, decline. This meeting's not happening. And then on top of that, the meeting organizer has to make sure that documentation happens during the meeting and any takeaways are contextualized and then added to the handbook so that the entire company can benefit from whatever happened in the synchronous meeting. So we make it really hard to have meetings so that we try to figure out a better way to get to the outcome instead of having a meeting. So our meeting hygiene is kind of different, but it would be tough to imagine going back, especially in the world of Zoom fatigue. We try to avoid that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that a big mistake that I think so many companies made, right? And it was natural. It wasn't that they necessarily made a mistake, but when we're used to being together all the time and being synchronous in order to be productive, then that's the natural default is we've got to be together on Zoom all day in order to be productive. And we very quickly saw as a world and as a society that, oh, this is not necessary to be together all the time. There's a beautiful balance between synchronous and asynchronous. Kevan, what do you think? Do you want to continue this conversation, or do you want me to pop a new question at you?
Yeah, maybe I can add just one thing that I don't know if it's fully unique that we do, but it is something that I'm really proud that we've taken that step is into like emotional well-being for our team. So we have one of our perks is on mental health and wellness. We pay for coaching and sessions and we use Modern Health, I believe is the app for it. And I think, we do a remote work survey every year. And one of the biggest challenges people continue to say year after year is isolation is something that it comes up a lot with remote work. And so I'm really proud that that's something that we've identified happens to us too at Buffer, and we're trying to actively change that and iterate on that. So yeah, I'm grateful for that perk. And I think a lot of companies are starting to lean into that too. And it's great to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, speaking of staying unified as a team and building that culture, a common question that I know I get all the time, I'm sure that you guys get asked it regularly. How do we build culture? How do we build trust? How do we unify as a team if we're literally apart? So talk to me about that. I know that retreats, all of you have famous retreats that you've blogged about, so maybe our people have seen those, but yeah, retreats, communication channels that you talked about a little bit, Darren. How are you guys staying unified as a team and building that interpersonal trust without bumping each other into each other at the hallway or at the break room? I like to say that if you can't talk about puppies, you can't talk about profits, and so it's important that we have time to just have casual conversations. How do you guys do that? Zandy, I know as a happiness expert, I feel like you have a good answer to this.
I hope I have a good answer. Yeah, we do a lot of communication, so we keep that communication going all the time. And I think Darren was talking about this as well. We have Slack channels that are for water cooler topics, and make sure that people, as they're onboarded, are aware of them. We have P2s that are just specific to, putting additions on your house or changing the faucet out for the first time, like things along those lines. And also, everything you can think of, crafts, knitting, puppies and kittens, all of it, babies, all of it. And we try to make sure that new automaticians are aware of them, so they know where to go when they need to take a break from their daily work or just say hi to people and see people who are interested in the same things as them. We also approach it deliberately rather than from like I hope this person finds out about these things standpoint. We assign every new automatician a mentor within the company. We ask the mentor to reach out to them in their first 3 days and then give them sort of a schedule of how often to touch base, what things to talk about, how to loop them into company culture. And that person is always outside of their area of work. So they get to meet somebody outside of their direct space. So they can ask the stupid questions, which don't exist, of course. Every question's valuable. And we also have a long history of feedback communication within the culture, where we ask people to give feedback clearly, transparently, and timely, but give them opportunities to do it anonymously as well if they need to.
Fantastic. Kevan, Darren, what do you guys think? How are you guys building that trust with each other and culture?
Yeah, it's interesting to think of the team that I manage. We have, I'm based in Idaho in the USA. I have teammates in Singapore, in Sydney, in Poland, in the UK, the East Coast. Like, there's not a time that all of us can be together without someone starting their day super early or staying up super late. And so that team connection is a challenge for us. I don't know that we've fully solved it yet, but we're always eager to try new things. I think asynchronous versus synchronous is a big conversation for us. We try to default to everything asynchronous. Then when it comes to connection, we try to do that through those asynchronous channels. So we have a daily or a weekly stand-up that is similar to maybe the P2 model. We use a tool called Threads. It's for more of these archived conversations that people can access at any time. So we check in there. We ask questions about not only what we're doing each week at work, but what's happening in our lives. We have this concept of bring your whole self to work. And I think that permission to include that aspect of yourself on the job, I think is makes a big difference when it comes to that connection when you're not with people in person. When things are a bit more normal in the world, we do try to get together once a year as a full company, and then another time a year as an individual team. So our marketing team would get together, for instance, and those happen anywhere around the world. We pick a spot and all meet up there. On the in-between times, it's a lot of, the weekly stand-ups, weekly, monthly check-ins with teams together. And then a lot of that bringing your whole self to work and be comfortable sharing a bit of the life beyond work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that aspect of communication, of being more open and more vulnerable, is important in a virtual environment, because that's all we have. We don't have environmental context or cues or nonverbal communication to help people understand who we are. We can't put up the poster, John Bon Jovi or something in our cubicle and be like, this is who I am. We have to tell people, we have to explain it. So yeah, I think everybody needs to work on that more transparent, consistent, frequent communication style in order to make it work. Darren, any more thoughts on culture development, or do you want to move on to something else?
Yeah, I'll add quickly that in a remote setting, your culture equals values. When you're in a co-located space, maybe the color of the walls or the neighborhood that you're in or what restaurants are nearby, all of that kind of contributes to the energy or vibe, but none of that is really truly culture. So we define our culture by what our values are. We write our culture down. And you can very clearly see it's how we treat each other, it's how we treat external parties, and how those values are lived out. When you see those values being lived out, you think this is what culture feels like. This is what belonging feels like. And we want to make sure that we hire people where they resonate with those values. In terms of making sure informal communication still happens, you have to be intentional about it. I think a lot of suddenly remote leaders are trying to figure this out because they never put any intentionality behind it. But at GitLab, it's actually the responsibility of our people group to work with our leaders to find new ways for people to engage. We just spun up a talent show recently. We had over 130 people on a Zoom call. We had about 20 or 30 people signing up to show off talents on Zoom. We had a panel of judges, some prizes, some healthy competition. Not rocket science here, but someone has to be responsible for creating that atmosphere for that to happen, because you can't rely on spontaneity and fate. No one is just going to cross paths in the hallway and relationships sort of blossom from there. And lastly, in-person matters a lot. In-person is very important. We are relational, communal beings. And if you stay home for too long and don't have any human contact, it does start to wear on you. So we get the whole team together for a week, a year, and then we have a series of user events and sales conferences. We try to bring people together as much as we possibly can, and we value that. At GitLab, the annual retreat is something that we all mark on our calendar as a business trip that is cannot miss. Compared to a lot of co-located companies, you would do everything you could to get out of a week-long business trip. So it's funny how that shifts depending on your perspective.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Zandy.
I was just going to say, we say that the grand meetup that we have every year is the 1 week a year that makes the other 51 weeks work.
Totally agree.
Absolutely. Yet if you have them for, 40 weeks of the year, then it loses its magic, loses its novelty, and it becomes just another day. So yeah, I find that because for remote teams, when you do get it in person, finally, it's just magic. It's absolute magic. Yeah, if you worked in an office together, it'd be like, whatever, I can access them anytime, right? Distance makes the heart grow fonder. And I really like the point that you made, Darren, about the values, and so many people are very, very validly worried about remote worker isolation. Are we all going to be hermits? However, it's important to remember that true culture and true unity comes from connection, not from proximity. And so it's very, very possible and common to be feeling lonely and disconnected and lost if you're sitting a few feet away from somebody. So this is really what we're trying to focus on and build in distributed companies, is how do we make sure that people really feel equipped to do their job, they feel individually valued and recognized and appreciated as part of this team dynamic, regardless of where they're located. So speaking of that, this is a really big concern for a lot of people, is onboarding and training. It came up in our conversation, it came up in the chat box, and we have it in our loaded questions as well, of what does this look like? From day one, how do we make sure that people understand what our culture is and that they feel connected, and they don't have that opportunity to just walk around the office and get to know people and learn through osmosis. So what does that process look like at all of your companies? Kevan, I don't think I've targeted you first, so let's start with you.
Yeah, of course. The osmosis point is interesting. I think there is a way to achieve that through remote work, through the access to information. I think that's something we try to do at Buffer, is make everything accessible, transparent, so that when you do onboard, you have everything there to learn that you want to learn. We definitely don't want that fire hose feeling also of there's so much coming at you that you're a bit overwhelmed. So we send folks down a path, but it's all available there for people to learn and absorb as they get into it. I think a big part of it too is the hiring process for us. So onboarding almost starts at the point of hiring. So our job descriptions, we're a transparent company, so you can go into our blog and learn about how we do remote work, how we approach all that. The job listing has all that information. In the interview stage, part of our interview stage is asynchronous, so we can see how you all work in that way. Part of it is Loom videos, so we can see what you're like on recorded videos and how you communicate ideas and information that way. And so we get a really good sense for what you will be like as part of Buffer, and hopefully what Buffer will be like if you are to join our team. And then that makes the onboarding process a lot more smooth for us. So we have a lot of documentation once you join, but we have a pretty good sense that you're on the right path, like from day one and before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I remember the first time that I got that question as a consultant, like, well, what happens to job shadowing? Like, I can't do job shadowing anymore. And, being new in my role, I was like, what in the world? Like, what are you talking? Of course we still do job shadowing. Like, it's just happening in different channels. Like, over my dead body, am I going to have some new hire like, well, you're on your own. Like, of course we have job shadowing. It's just like come into my virtual meeting and watch my notes in my Google Doc as opposed to look at my notebook and come into the conference room. So
yeah, it's like job lurking in that
yeah.
sense. Yeah.
We're very good at stalking here in the virtual world. Zandy, I'm sure that this is a massive part of your job description. So what are your best tips and strategies for onboarding and training?
So something we do is we begin during the hiring process too. We do a trial. So everybody who comes to work for Automattic spends a couple of weeks doing the job and figuring out if they're a good fit for this work and if they like being in this kind of environment and working on the things that they're going to be working on. And it gives us a chance also to give them tips for how to improve or things that they can tweak or make sure that the thing that they're trying to do is the thing that they really want to do. And so with our happiness engineer support, we do a 4-week trial and we can support them every step of the way. And sometimes we get towards the end and people realize it's not what they want to do. And other times they realize that they love it more than they realized. And that's both those situations are okay with us. We want people to be moving into the role for all the right reasons. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we do is when we start people at Automattic, their first 2 weeks are in support. So they join the happiness team, regardless of what their role is, for 2 weeks and talk directly with customers. And it gives them a chance to understand the product really well. But it also puts them in the deep end with more than 300 of our friendliest people and constant high-touch communication, and give them a chance to really understand how the company works, as it's just a lot of communication all day long during the hours that they're going to be working anywhere in the world, because we have happiness engineers all around the globe talking to customers all day, 24 hours. So this gives them a chance to dive into the company culture with both feet, but also have little floaties on, so they're not getting lost day one. They've got a lot of friends helping them.
I love that. And I think a big takeaway that we should all be writing down as we're listening to this conversation is be prepared for working interviews. That's not super common in co-located companies, but it is very, very common in distributed teams because of exactly everything that we're talking about. We need to be prepared to look for and experience that culture match. Are we conducive, working in similar styles, and are we communicating effectively in a virtual environment? And we have to see each other in action, not just employer to employee, but also employee to employer, because there's different styles of virtual teams, and the dynamics and organizational behavior of distributed companies is very unique as well. It's not one size fits all. So you as job seekers need to be empowered to identify the company that's a good match for you as well. Darren, I want to zoom specifically into the skills training part of onboarding. What skills are you guys really pushing and promoting as you're onboarding new hires at GitLab?
At a high level, we try to hire managers of one. This is actually one of our sub-values. And the reason we use that terminology is it's really broad. We want to make sure that people can manage their personal life, manage their boundaries between work and life, manage the inflow of work, be a self-seeker to first try to find the information themselves within the GitLab handbook instead of reverting to synchronous norms where they may have come from. That encapsulates a lot. And so there's a lot of digging that goes into that. But you can really figure this out by asking a person, tell me about a time where you didn't have very much information and you were kind of on your own. What did that look like? Or if you were moving a piece of a project forward, what did that look like? Or tell me about a time where your cohorts were on campus or in a different place and you were in a different part of the world and you contributed and you moved that project forward. We ask for people to tell stories. It's less about specific anecdotes and more about tell me a story, tell me your experience. That helps us get a peek into the mind of how someone works in a similar role to GitLab. We also make it very clear what it's going to be like to work at GitLab. All of our strategy and our vision, our product roadmap, Like I said, there's even a section in the FAQ called "What's it like to work at GitLab?" So people know what they're getting into, and I like to say no one accidentally ends up at GitLab because you very much opt into this culture. But I think the one thing that would maybe surprise a lot of people is we look for great storytellers. You'll oftentimes hear at remote companies that communication is really important, and it is, but it's much deeper than that. We want people that think 3 steps prior and 3 steps forward, because you're probably going to be writing a lot, and you need to be able to contextualize and deliver very precise, detailed missives on whatever your project is, so that if someone comes in midstream, legitimately a year or 2 after an idea is incepted, you have written it down in such a way that they can join that conversation midstream and contribute meaningfully. That's a rare skill, especially for people that have been used to just verbalizing things over and over in a loop of synchronous meetings in a co-located space. That's a strange function. And so we want to make sure that people are comfortable doing that and they prefer to do that. And again, that they know what they're getting into.
Absolutely. I love this conversation. I always say that the 3 pillars of remote work are trust, culture, and communication, and we're covering all 3. So this is a beautiful thing. So let's run in that direction of communication, because I know that when I am hiring and working with new hires, this is something that we talk about all the time. Is the communication style of remote workers is just different. It requires requires a different style that I personally define as more consistent, more frequent, and more consistent, more frequent, and more empathetic. So I'd love to hear from Kevan and Zandy, especially on the topic of communication. What are you looking for as your training or as your screening in that style of communication? What do you need workers to be as they are showing and producing work?
Yeah, I think the one that stands out from your list, especially Laurel, is the empathy component. For us, we recognize that a lot of written communication can be tone deaf, or you can be misinterpreted. And so it's really important that you spend that time to make sure you're communicating clearly and that you're understanding how it might be interpreted by the other person. So that act of empathy is really central to the way that we communicate at Buffer. What that looks like in practice is it might be removing lingo from the things that you write. So maybe fewer acronyms, because that someone might not understand what those are. And I think especially with remote work, the back and forth of written communication can take time, especially if the person you're communicating with is halfway around the world. So communicating clearly is a really powerful way that we stay efficient and that we get work done. And taking the extra time to do that, it pays dividends because it keeps things moving and not slowing things down too much. So empathy is probably the biggest one for us on the communication side.
Right. And it's so relatable too, right? Like we've all had that experience, even prior to remote work, of like writing that text that we thought was totally innocent and somebody completely misinterpreted and it snowballed into this massive drama, right? And that's exactly what we are at risk for with asynchronous communication every single day in distributed teams. Like we have to think very, very, very carefully and, like Darren said, very proactively about how our messages could be interpreted, how they could be impacting this other person, and we just need to be more emotionally intelligent and socially aware, I think, in general. Zandy, is that part of the happiness definition at Automattic? Is this higher level of emotional intelligence?
Yeah, we always say assume best intent when you're reading a comment or a post or a Slack message. But also we freely give feedback. Feedback at Automattic is integral. And a lot of the feedback we give is around communication and around how you can communicate for the right impact and not focus on the intent of communication. So asking somebody, what do you want to accomplish with this post, right? And then helping them see how they can get the most impact in the clearest way with the least disruption. And that could be, like Kevan said, cutting out some of those acronyms, speaking at the clearest and most basic level to get your point across, and not using slang, or knowing your audience where you're putting your comment or post or whatever it might be. but absolutely, empathy is top of the stack.
I love it. All right, well, I'm going to take a quick break to tell everybody in the audience we want to hear your questions. We're not just here to give you our questions and answers, but we want to make sure that you are getting the information out of this that you want. So if you have questions, go ahead, pop them in the chat. Make sure that you're in the stage chat, and then you can pop your questions in there. They will be facilitated to us through our wonderful backend moderators. And so we'll do one more question that's from the can, just to continue the conversation, give you guys some time to fill up the queue, and then the stage is yours, and we'll be answering as rapid fire as possible your questions. So make sure to fill up that chat. So to our wonderful panelists, let's try to summarize everything that we talked about. We've been talking about job seeking. We've been talking about trust and culture and communication. We've been talking about team dynamics. So just as an all-encompassing answer to that, talk to me about screening. If we have people in our audience that are hungry to work for your brand or hungry to work for a specific brand that is remote friendly, how can they raise their hand and tell the employer that they are a good fit? What does that screening and matching process look like? Especially in a workforce and in a job market that is so competitive. Everybody wants a remote job right now, everybody. And so how can they stand out if nothing else?
I'll start there.
You go ahead, Darren.
I'll just say for GitLab, it's more about values alignment. If you just come into a job interview and you're just open about, look, I hate my commute, I just want to work remotely, I don't really care what I do, probably not the best way to go about it. We want to first find people that are truly passionate about the work that they'll be doing and truly aligned with the values. And I'd say in general, GitLab or elsewhere, that's what you should be looking at. Look first for a job or a role that you're going to love and a culture and a set of values that will resonate with you. Because if you join a remote company and you aren't aligned with the values, you won't have a commute, but it can still be miserable. So don't think that remote is going to solve everything. Remote is just a component of it. Values alignment and making sure you're working with people you enjoy and doing work that you enjoy is really important. And go ahead and think about, in the interview process, moments in life where you have worked autonomously, or you've worked in a remote setting, or you've been disconnected or decoupled from the rest of your team. That kind of experience is really great to bring up.
That's a really good point, because I know that people have been asking, if I don't have remote work experience, can I qualify to be a remote worker? Yep. And honestly, all of us do have, and some people, like, we all have some level of remote work experience. It may be, volunteering with an organization that doesn't have an office, or we did online education when we were in college or something. Like, draw on that experience. And ultimately, just what these companies want to see is that you're a good self-manager, to just prove that you can work autonomously. And it's less about location. You might be focused on the location, but the more that you're not focused on location, you're focused on qualification in the job seeking process, that will take you the farthest. Zandy and Kevan, what do you guys think?
So with Automattic, we look for people who can communicate really well. That's something that we just don't ever lower the bar for. We want you to be a really excellent communicator, and it ties in with what Darren was talking about, with like being able to tell your story and explain to us why you feel like this is a good match. It's absolutely about the culture alignment as well. You don't have to be somebody who is, adopts all the latest technology the moment it comes out. That's certainly fine, but you can also be somebody who sticks with the tried and true methods that you're used to and is just well aligned with the culture that we already have. We look for people who obviously meet the qualifications, but we also look for potential in people. What kind of impact can they have? We want somebody who can be a force multiplier and have high impact and be efficient and effective. So examples of projects that you can do and have done autonomously are important. But the other half of that, the other half of the seesaw between autonomous is being able to work really within the group as well and be able to communicate that work. So if somebody wants to come into the company and then disappear 8 hours a day and just sort of show up for the weekly stand-up or whatever, that's not really a good fit. We need people who can be really tightly tied in to constant communication and be clear about what they're working on and where, what stumbling blocks they're coming up against and how they think they're going to solve them, and getting feedback from the group all the time.
Wonderful. Kevan, I know that you guys get such a high application rate at Buffer. Who stands out to you guys?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Darren and Zandy have said rings true for us. Also, the two things I might add, I tend to look for responsibility and responsiveness when it comes to screening. And so responsibility, we can screen for that when it comes to the exercise that someone might take. Like, are they filling it out completely? Are they understanding the instructions? Are they being responsible for turning it in on time and doing it in a timely way? Responsiveness, when we're communicating back and forth, are they communicating quickly, on time? We're not expecting people to drop everything to talk to us during the interview process, especially as folks are doing other jobs. But just that way of communicating to tell us, what to expect, to set those expectations so that we aren't wondering, where this person went or what's happening. I think that is a sign for us that this person will thrive in a remote environment where communication is so important, and kind of communicating responsibly to your teammates and being part of that group. That's one of the ways we screen for it in the application process.
Amazing. Wonderful. All right. Well, I think it's time to get to some open Q&A. Thank you all for your incredible answers, and let's just keep the momentum going. We do have a lot of questions, which is great. So I'm going to try to rapid fire this. I'll target the questions to one person, but that doesn't mean that it is exclusive to one person. So if you have additional thoughts, just interject and interrupt and let's just keep it going. But we'll try to limit to one answer so we can get through as many questions as possible. So that sound good to you guys? So you're in the hot seat. You never know what's going to happen. This is where the stress starts happening. It's so exciting. Okay, so our first one is from Dale. He's talking about career trajectory. This is a very, very good one because there is evidence, statistical evidence, to show that career stagnancy is biased in hybrid teams. So people that are on site have faster career development than people that are off site, and so it's very much an out of sight, out of mind problem. And so he's asking about this. How do you ensure that in a hybrid team that there is equality and that there's not discrimination between on-site and off-site workers? Now, I know this is a tricky question because you guys are from fully distributed teams. Zandy, I think you're closer than anybody to even a close to hybrid model. So I'm going to point the question to you.
Sure. We really don't have any co-located spaces. Well, I guess that's not true because our Tumblr folks have been co-located. But what we do, like the angle that I can answer this is if people are more quiet and aren't actively pursuing career growth, do they get the chance to pursue the career growth as aggressively as anybody else? Like, do we only give career growth to the squeakiest wheel? And we try not to. One of the roles that I'm filling myself is making sure that our happiness engineers can grow and build and develop their careers in ways that are satisfying for them and give a lot of high impact back into happiness, and finding ways to make sure that that is available to every happiness engineer, whether they're speaking up for it or volunteer. I think probably we all have the same examples where if you put up a post for a call for volunteers to test something, for example, you kind of get the same couple of people who always, they love it, they want to be part of it, they apply for everything. But what about the people who think, well, I know so-and-so is going to apply and maybe I don't have time or I don't feel like I'm qualified enough? Making sure that team leads are talking to everybody on their team about opportunities that fit their interests and their growth trajectory that they are looking forward. So one happiness engineer may be very interested in troubleshooting, but another happiness engineer may be looking more for project management growth and then trying to find things that can fit both those types of people.
Perfect. I love it. And as a consultant, I'll also add that a remote work policy can really help with this. It's a legal protection of expectations and qualifications and enforcement of offsite standards. So that can be a massive help. But more importantly, if you are working in a hybrid team, what the problem is coming from is that you are trying to manage virtual employees with a physical workspace and a physical management method. So the more that you can move into a location irrelevant or location independent method that treats and manages everybody equally, that will help soothe those pains. Okay, next one. Let's see. Darren, I think that this is a good one for you. Claudette wants to know about continuing education. I know that some companies offer workshops for their employees to grow various skills. Is this common in the tech world? What does continuing education look like in remote?
Yep. So we'll support tuition reimbursement if people want to go get educated on anything that they could make them a more complete person and bring something else to the company. And then we have a series of what we call live learning sessions, and we're continually building out our learning and development program. We just stood up a leadership toolkit, and we have a managerial training session that is underway as well.
Thank you so much. Kevan, you ready? This one's for you. And I know that you guys have great practices at Buffer, so I'm really glad that this one by default went to you. But this question is asking about measuring performance, not just measuring productivity, which we know can often be measured with more accurately with results, but measuring team performance in general. What does that look like at Buffer?
Yeah, I guess we have a couple different tools that we use for that, and it's constantly evolving. So at the moment, we're using OKRs, and that's one performance indicator of how well are we setting and achieving goals. We use OKRs as a tool for learning, not for judging. So our goal is to see what's happened, learn from it, and improve for the next time around. We don't tie performance reviews or compensation or anything to the outcomes of those OKRs. And then some of the other performance things we often look at the health of our teams. So that happens through Culture Amp surveys. Culture Amp is a tool that we use to kind of gather historical context on how the teams have been improving in terms of happiness, satisfaction with the job. Anything that we want to test and survey for, we use that tool for that. That gives us a pretty holistic view of like how we're doing for the business, how we're doing for our people.
Fantastic. Love it. All right, this one's going to be open. Whoever wants it, takes it. Jump up and speak up first. This one is from Ben, who is asking, what does a typical work week look like at your company? So how much time is spent planning and strategizing and in meetings versus independent heads down work?
Yeah, so our individual contributors probably spend 2 to 3 hours a week in meetings, and the rest is heads down focused work time. We're currently experimenting with a 4-day work week. So for the next 6 months, it'll be 4 out of 5 days of focused work. And the managers have a much different schedule. My schedule, for instance, is probably 80% meetings, 20% focus time. So it's definitely split between individual contributor work and management work.
Wonderful.
I'd say that's the same for us too.
Great. Made that answer easy. Okay. Let's see. Darren, I believe that you were the one that said this, so I'll target this question to you. Meg is asking, what does, quote, bring your whole self to work mean at each of your organizations?
Yeah, I think Kevan mentioned that, but it's very true at GitLab as well. For us, it's really simple. I think we have one of the most geographically and culturally diverse teams in the world. And for companies that are trying to figure out a way to make their company more diverse, hiring remote is the obvious way to do that. In any given day, I could see glimpses of Copenhagen and New Zealand and Kenya and North Dakota. And it's because people are there. So they're able to bring their whole selves to work because we don't force them to move somewhere that isn't fully aligned with where they want to be. So for us, it's as simple as hire the best people, let them stay where they are, and you, by default, get all of them at work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And it is such a psychological shift as well, because when we're at home, we are used to being our uninhibited selves, right? We are ourselves in our safe place at home. And then all of a sudden, we have work come into our safe place, and typically we have a buffer zone, literally a buffer zone, right? We get in the car, we drive, we get into that mindset shift of this is my work self and then this is my personal self, and now that work environment, all those dynamics of your team all come into your personal space. And so for a lot of people, it can be very, very vulnerable. It can also really create a problem with work-life boundaries. So Kevan, because I didn't give proper credit where credit was due, I'll bounce the next question to you, which is about that. So how do you ensure that your employees, this is from Selena, by the way, how do you ensure that your employees have healthy boundaries between work life and personal life, and especially to prevent burnout?
Yeah, it's a great question. I like Darren's phrasing of like a manager of one. I think a lot of it comes down to that personal responsibility to set boundaries for yourself. And some of that you can screen through the hiring process. Like, will this person thrive in a remote environment where there is a lot of personal accountability and responsibility for creating those boundaries? We have a couple of things in place at Buffer. So our management style is we're very conscious of time off and people's mental well-being, how much they're being worked, where they're at on the stress burnout scales. And so we're always encouraging folks to consider that and to take extra time if need be. We try to set examples as managers to log out of Slack, turn off notifications at a certain time. It's hard when you're fully remote, but people recognize, oh, this person is in my time zone and they're posting messages at 8 p.m. Like, it's a very tricky balance there if you're not setting a good example from the top down. So we try to do some of that stuff. But we often just leave it up to the teammates themselves. One of the beautiful things about remote work is you can set your own schedule, more or less. And so I don't want to dictate when someone can or can't be online, but I do want to I want to create space for that conversation to happen if it feels like they're working more than they want to be or more than they should be, without being too micromanagement about what specific hours they are online.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'd add that to the list of soft skills that is so critical to remote work. We were talking about emotional intelligence. I'll add discipline. It is absolutely essential. So thank you for that. Zandy, you're up next. You ready?
I'm ready.
This one is from Eddie. He's talking about how do you foster growth and mentorship in a remote setting? And I'll even take that a little step further and say just growth and innovation in general as a team.
We do it through culture, mostly. We say anybody can have a great idea. And when you have that great idea, make sure that you bring it up. Anybody can ping our CEO, Matt, and say, hey, got this idea. I want to pursue it. They can talk about the things that they find important. Not everything we will pursue, but through the culture of great ideas come from anyone, we encourage people to keep growing, use that brain. We want your brain and we want you. And those things are the ways that people can have a big impact. So it's the culture, but we put into place also things that people can do. So we also use Culture Amp for gathering feedback, and we do a couple of times a year an anonymous survey and try to pull out some of those ideas that people are having that maybe they don't feel they can bring up. Or we have internal feedback forms too that people can fill out to give feedback to people in a safer way. And then we coach our team leads on how to communicate and help people learn to manage up and continue to advocate for the things that are important to them.
Wonderful. All right, this one is another question that is open to any of you. So whoever wants to pop in first. Kevan was fast on the draw last time, so we'll see who wins this time. Is the workload increased for remote positions? So research states that remote workers work faster. They're more productive, 40% more productive than their in-office counterparts. So does that mean that they just get their work done in a shorter amount of time, or are their scopes of work increased?
I think what's interesting about that research is it's all done based on hybrid remote companies. Like you said it, they're being compared against in-office counterparts. So for a hybrid company, it's a whole different beast because you're fundamentally managing an on-site employee experience and an off-site employee experience. And remoters' guilt in a hybrid setting is very real. Most people in a remote setting will feel some sort of guilt of, I don't have 2 or 3 hours of commute, so does that mean I should work 2 or 3 more hours in a day? And this is, I think, going to be a massive reckoning for a lot of companies that kind of quasi go back to the office and then leave people remote. In an all remote setting, we have one playing field. This works itself out a lot more equally. But for those in a hybrid setting, be careful for that. It's really easy to overwork when you consider the commute time a part of work time instead of your time.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much. I'll just answer the last question myself. That is in both places. I'm seeing a lot of questions about neurodiversity, and I want to make sure that that one gets a voice because remote work is such a great tool for enhancing diversity and inclusion of all different scopes, right? Not just the traditional discriminatory factors like age and race and sexual orientation and gender, but also diversity in terms of urban-rural divide and neurodiversity. So this can be a really, really great option if you are somebody that has a disability or a minority of some kind. Remote can be a really great option for you to leverage and to grow in your career because we measure results instead of physical supervision. There is less opportunity and room for discrimination. And we also, like you heard, we leverage asynchronous communication a lot. And that gives people the ability to process and produce work at the speed that is comfortable for them. So if you have a mental health concern or if you have ADHD and cognitive processing disorder were brought up. So if you just need more time to process, remote gives you that flexibility. So that is a really, really great topic that I wanted to make sure we squeezed in before Debbie kicks us off. But thank you so much to Zandy and Kevan and Darren for all of your incredible insights and letting us look into the windows of your virtual organizations. We really appreciate your time. And of course, thank you to Arc for hosting us today.
Thank you for moderating, Laurel.
My pleasure. Thanks, everyone.